Hello, everyone. This is Ariane Rathsack, Director of MBA and Professional Programs for Forte. I am pleased to welcome you to Forte's Women Lead webinar series. A little bit about Forte for those who may be new to the Women Lead series. Forte has been around for about 15 years, and Forte's community of motivated and inspiring women, 100,000 women and counting, is changing the balance of power in the workplace. We open doors for women to reimagine what they can achieve in business, from launching first jobs to advancing to the C-suite. Through business education, role models, professional networks, and leadership training, Forte shows women how to build the credibility, skills, network, and confidence to thrive as leaders and to change the status quo. Forte is pleased to partner with executive education programs in delivering our Women Lead series. I'd like to especially recognize the sponsor of today's webinar, the Wharton MBA for Executives, and welcome their Director of Career Management, Dawn Graham, who will be our speaker today. In addition to her work coaching and supporting EMBAs in achieving their career goals, Dawn hosts Career Talk, a call-in radio show on SiriusXM. She regularly writes for Forbes and recently published her book, Switchers: How Smart Professionals Change Careers and See Success. So with that, I would like to welcome Dawn, who is joining us from Philadelphia today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you to everybody who's taking the time to attend today. What I'm hoping you get out of this are a few ideas for career planning for 2019. And so I want to start with a question. I want to ask, if you think about your career, how much time did you spend in 2018 planning for your career? And this might be things you want to do in terms of skills you want to gain, or might be revising your resume. It could be a lot of different things, but how much time, if you had to be honest, did you spend? And did you have a concrete goal where at the end of 2018, you could look at that box and say, I achieved what I wanted to do through my career planning? And this is a rhetorical question, so you don't have to type in the answer, but I just want you to think about it for a moment. A recent guest on my radio show said something that blew my mind, which was that professionals spend on average 1.5 hours annually on career planning. And this kind of was surprising to me, but when we think about it, there's so many things keeping us busy that this number can probably be accurate for a lot of us. I mean, if you put performance reviews aside and things of that nature, we often don't spend a lot of time planning our careers, but it's becoming more important to plan than ever. And there's some reasons about that I want to go through. And I love this visual because I think this is how most of us approach the career planning process when we think about it. The reality is that careers have changed. And when we think about a traditional career, we think about it representing our expertise and our profession and introducing ourselves with our company and our title, and it's really part of our identity. And it's something that builds incrementally over time and gives us financial and psychological rewards. But that was the career of yesterday. The word itself comes from the 16th century word for road, which when we think about a road, we think about a linear path that moves forward. But the fact is, expertise is a shorter shelf life today than ever, and the idea of one career has long gone away. We know we're not going to retire from the same organization, and in fact, 4.2 years is about the average time people spend in a role. One of the things I talk to my students about is that if you're in a role for too long now, it can actually be held against you because companies feel like you're not agile. And if you think about how the economy is changing, we have the gig economy and portfolio careers and side hustles and hybrid jobs, which are jobs that there are two different jobs that have been kind of smushed together and now are a new job out there. Jobs are changing so quickly that employers are finding it really difficult to hire because what they hire you into their company will likely change a year from now. So one of the reasons I think that's relevant is because when I wrote this book, Switchers, what I was thinking about is that there's a lot of individuals who got on a career path early in their life, and maybe that ladder is no longer viable because the industry has changed, or maybe you just decided you want to do something new, or maybe you have a family now and it doesn't fit into your time schedule. But if none of those things are true for you, I think the fact is that switching careers is going to become the new normal. And that's in part because we know a lot of roles are going away. We know a lot of roles are merging. We know a lot of roles are emerging, whether it's because they're going global or because of technology. There are so many things that are changing that if you're not intentionally being a switcher, chances are that you will be in the future. So what do careers look like today? So one of the things that I think it's really important to recognize in this world as things are changing is that constant reinvention is critical. And what I mean by that is that we all need to continuously be looking at our careers and saying, are these skills going to be the skills I'm going to need next year? Or what are those skills and how can I be closing that gap? And reinventing yourself with the speed and pace of the market. So if when you answered that question about career planning, you didn't spend a lot of time, one of the things we're all going to have to do is make that a regular part of our daily lives. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today as well. And I want to kind of leave you with a plan on how to do that. The other thing that's becoming increasingly important is what I call creating ambassadors. And this is kind of an extension of what most of us know as networking. So we know building contacts are what gets us to the next level, what gets us to the next job. But it's more important than ever today, especially if you're going to be a switcher, because what we know is that 98% of companies use applicant tracking systems, and those systems don't really work for people who are switching, because if you don't have the right titles, the right keywords, you're just going to be spit out of that system, so that your network's going to be really critical. But even as the world moves forward and we get AI and all these other matching algorithms, the fact is that still people hire based on trust. People hire based on relationships. Those final decisions come down to who do I want to work with for 40 hours a week. So building relationships versus chasing opportunities is going to give you more opportunities in the long run, because it's going to be who you know and who knows what you know that is going to be important in the future, especially as jobs change and people don't have the traditional backgrounds that they used to because these jobs are brand new. And the last one is about career stories. So we're traditionally told, or we're expected to have this history of our career, and no longer is that the case. People have very short attention spans, and you really need to put together a career story that is relevant to the audience you're targeting. And that means leaving some things out. So no longer do we need to include our entire history, but what we need to do, for example, on our resume or our LinkedIn, or when we introduce ourselves to people, we really need to have a concise, coherent career story that picks and chooses the pieces of our background that are most relevant to our audience and most relevant to the market as it is today. So it's important to be looking at these three things constantly so that we are presenting ourselves in a way that makes us marketable. I just want to kind of pose a question. Again, no need to type answers, but think about, when was the last time you updated your resume? And if you think about your resume, is it a historical account of everything you've done, or is it branded and targeted towards the current market and the market needs of today? Have you taken anything off that maybe isn't relevant any longer? Or if you've been in the job market, does it go back further than 20 years? There's a lot of things that we can do very, very easily when we think about a resume to make these updates. But that's just the starting place. I mean, LinkedIn is a place where your career story is going to be critically relevant because it goes back to how you introduce yourself to others. So think about your LinkedIn. When was the last time you took a step back and looked at your LinkedIn? And in totality, does it tell the career story you want? Or is it slapped together with everything that you put on there when you first got on LinkedIn and you haven't really groomed it in a while? Do you have a clear background in the front top section that talks about your brand and what you bring to the market and your value? These are things that I think many of us don't do until we're ready to be in a job search, or worse, till we're forced to be in a job search. And I think one of the things that's going to become more relevant as we move forward is that these things are going to be the norm. We're going to have to be updating these things regularly because the market is changing so quickly. So as we move into 2019 and we start thinking about career planning, some of the things you might want to be looking at are some of the tools you're using, some of the social media you're using, and saying, is this representative of who I am today and the skills that are most relevant to the market? The other question I have is, when was the last time you had a networking meeting where you made a meaningful new relationship? So maybe you went to a conference and you made a meaningful new relationship, or maybe you met with somebody in a department at your organization that you didn't know before and you've built a relationship. I think this is something else that we can add to our career plan that is going to be immensely helpful as we move forward, because what we know is up to 80% of opportunities are never advertised, and they come through our relationships. So the more people who we know and the more people who know what we know, the more opportunities that are going to come to us. So making these things a regular way of life is going to set a path where we're going to have the maximum number of opportunities coming our way. And if there's one graphic that you remember, I hope it's the one on the screen now that has these three aspects: continual reinvention, collaborative relationships, and conscious branding, which is pulling into that career story. Because these are the three things that, regardless of whether you're looking to make a switch, if you continuously do these things on a daily basis and pay attention to these things, you will always have opportunities in front of you. So let me talk a little bit about switching careers. I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about how to make a career switch, but keeping in mind the fact that these techniques will work whether you're looking to make a major switch or you're just looking to change jobs or you're just thinking about your future in general of your career. So what you're seeing on the screen right now are the degrees of difficulty in switching, and I think the first thing you need to do if you're thinking about making a change is choose your switch. One of the things I know with working with clients is that a lot of people know when they're done with a job. They know when they've hit their limit and they're burnt out and they want to do something new, but a lot of times they don't know exactly what they want to do next, and so they tend to throw a lot of darts at the wall or maybe pick something that sounds good on paper. And I think it's so important in a job search, especially with how competitive things are today, to run to something versus run from something. And throughout my book and as I do coaching, one of the things I always incorporate into it is the psychology of the job search. And what I mean by that is that there's any interaction between two humans is going to have psychology in it. And so when I talk about running to something versus running from something, your network and your interviewer or your future hiring manager is going to be able to tell how excited or hungry you are about that job, or if you're just running from something and want to get out of there and do anything. And so I think that's going to be a critical piece of anybody's job search, is to be able to demonstrate that hunger and be excited about where you're going. So step one is really choosing your switch. And if you look at the graphic, the least challenging is the no-switch career. So maybe you're getting a promotion or making a lateral move for money. And then we've got the industry switch, which is maybe you're a buyer at Walmart and you want to be a buyer at Target. So you're staying in the same type of role. I'm sorry, maybe you're a buyer at Walmart and you want to be a buyer in a different company or a different industry than retail is what I meant to say. And then we've got the functional switch, which is maybe I'm a recruiter and I want to be in marketing in my pharma company. And then the double switch, which a lot of people are making today, which is I want to be maybe an HR person in a startup, but right now I'm in corporate law. And so when you kind of look at these different switches and you try and determine them, I think the reason it makes so much sense to build your strategy is because the greater degree of difficulty your switch, the harder it is to do it, and the more time it's going to take. And the fact is we all have realities that we need to face. So you have to understand where this fits in. A double switch may require more sacrifice, which could be pay, or it could be a step back in level. It could be that you have to move geographically. It could mean that you need to travel more. And so I think you need to think about these things. And a saying I always say is that if you're not willing to lose, you're not ready to switch. And bringing the psychology into that, what I mean by that is that we all are very attached to our careers. So we've built an identity around them. And if you think about how we introduce ourselves today, it's always, what do you do, or where do you work? This is one of the common things we always say. And so it's become such a part of our identity that even if we're making a switch that we're excited about, sometimes giving up some of the things that we have is difficult to do. So I think one of the first things you need to do when you're making a switch is really think about how this new opportunity aligns with your values and your lifestyle. So I worked with a student who is an accomplished engineer. He had a young family. He wanted to make a double switch to strategy consulting, and he was so excited that he's nailed down his target, and he already kind of started envisioning himself in this career. But then the loss aversion set in. The loss aversion is a common psychological phenomenon that we all experience. Loss aversion is that idea that it hurts more to lose than gains of similar value. So, for example, if you have $20 in your pocket and you lose it, you're going to be way more upset about that for way longer than if you walk down the street and find $20. You'll probably be happy for that for the rest of the afternoon, but that's the idea of loss aversion. And so this idea of loss aversion for this particular student was he started thinking about, I have to take a step back, I have to travel more, I have to take a big pay cut. And when he started thinking about these things, that exciting strategy consultant position didn't feel so exciting any longer. And so when you're going to make a switch, these realities are important. And sometimes I think the best way to understand if something's a fit is to clarify what I call your plan A through taking action. I love this visual because when you're looking at this and you see them building this bridge and they say, well, maybe I should have built a boat instead, a lot of times we don't see that answer until we kind of go a little bit down the wrong path. So trying things on makes a lot of sense if you're looking to make a switch. And that might mean creating an internship for yourself or creating a special project, or it might mean volunteering somewhere within your current organization to gain those skills. So talking to your boss and asking if you can maybe join the marketing team for some projects. Or it could be that you get a mentor who's working in this field to learn the day-to-day. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I think you really have to understand what that plan A is, what that target is, what it entails, what your audience is expecting, and be crystal clear on that. I had an example of a student who was a medical doctor, and he decided that he wanted to be in finance. So what he did is he worked with the finance team. He'd come in early every day for about 3 months, and he'd work with the finance team. He did a great job. He really impressed them so much that they were ready to give him an offer to move over from the clinical side of the hospital where he worked to the finance side. And interestingly, he declined because he realized through that experience that he enjoyed the clinical work so much more. What he thought would be greener grass on the other side wasn't. And so I think it's really important to do some of these experiments so that you can understand, is this going to be the right path for me? And one of the things people do that I think is what I call a career switch killer is oftentimes they'll choose education as the first step. And I am all for education, and I think it can help a lot of switchers learn lingo, build their network, but I don't think it's a great first step. So I had a client who thought she wanted to be a speech therapist, and step one was diving in, applying to schools, and jumping into a 2-year speech therapy program. Well, when she did her internship at the end, she realized this was not the type of work she wanted to do. It was nothing like she envisioned in her mind. So that's when she came to me and said, okay, I need to consider what my next career move is. And the challenge here is that now she had $30,000 worth of loans to pay back and 2 years spent moving in a direction that wasn't for her. So I do think that clarifying your plan A before you dive into something, trying it on, talking to people, seeing if you can get some experiences through your current organization or maybe through friends' organization is going to be one of the greatest things you can do. I think the other benefit of it is that you'll have some demonstrated commitment to your switch when you're ready to do it. So I want to talk a little bit about brand. And I love this picture because this is so true. So we have up here Oprah and Jerry Springer, both are talk show hosts, and obviously they have very different brands. If you think about their jobs, they at one point things have changed a little bit, but they both stand in front of audiences, interview guests, have audience questions. So they have very similar jobs, but obviously they have very different brands. And I love this because it reminds us all that we can do the same work, but we have a unique aspect to what we do that makes us special. And I think it's important for us as we think about our career planning to think about what this is. So for example, for me, I'm a career coach, but I'm also a licensed psychologist. And one of the things that I use as a differentiator is that I talk about how I bring psychology into my career coaching, and that's how I differentiate my brand. So I want you to just think for a moment about your job and about what a unique qualifier is for you. What is one of your unique selling points? We all have at least one. Some of us have more than one. Sometimes it's a unique background. Sometimes it's that you speak another language. Sometimes it's that you have, maybe you've done 2 disciplines and you're able to kind of put them together to have an expertise. But I do want you to think about it as we're talking about career planning, because this is going to be important for moving forward. What is your unique selling point? I want to talk a little bit about why brand is important, because I know a lot of people feel like brand is, I'm not a brand, I'm not a product, I'm a person. But the fact is, brand determines a lot in our lives, and we don't always realize it. The human brain loves to categorize, loves to categorize and label, because this is how it remains efficient. So humans decide based on emotions, and then we rationalize afterwards with cherry-picked data. And this is why brands are so important. And this is why we pay more for Tylenol than perhaps a generic CVS brand, because what we know is that it builds trust. And so your brand, whether you've been consciously building it or not, it exists. You can call it reputation, you can call it a lot of different things, but we all have one. And it determines what roles you get, what projects or teams you get asked to participate on, who wants to associate with you, how much you get paid, what information others share with you, what events you get invited to, maybe even what jobs you get considered for. So it's really important for you to think about what your brand is and what you're putting out there. I mean, are you the person who shows up early all the time, or are you the person who always shows up 5 minutes late? Are you always the naysayer at meetings, or are you always the one recognizing others? People are taking notice of all of these things. You communicate your brand every day through your body language, your tone. Social media is a great one. A lot of people believe they can be someone on social media and someone else in the office, and it's not the case anymore. People are looking. People are noticing. People are seeing, what hobbies, what activities, what causes you're interested in, and they're taking all this information and putting it together to build a brand about you, whether you're thinking about it consciously or not. So another activity I have for you for 2019 is to really start thinking about how you show up. Not just professionally, because I want to talk about that in a second, but also personally. We know likability is one of the first things that people determine about us. they put us in this category, and likability can change your life. You've probably experienced this. You have somebody in the office who's really likable. They show up late, you're fine with it. You have somebody in the office who's not so likable. They show up late, and you're like, see that person. So we know these things are real. We know people are paying attention. So think about, how do you show up? How do you think others are branding you? And if you're not sure, one of the easiest things you could do, it takes a little courage, but it's a great exercise if you are so inclined, is to email 10 people that you know. It could be friends, it could be work colleagues, it could be people who know you in different capacities, and ask them, what are 3 words you use to describe me? If you're really brave, you could say, what are 3 words you describe me in one area where I can improve in 2019? You may be surprised at what comes back. You may be surprised at how consistent, or maybe it's not consistent. So maybe you're showing up different ways in different places. But I think once you have a baseline of this, well, certainly we can't control how people think about us or see us. There are certain actions that we can take to ensure that we're aligned with the brand that we want to put out there, to ensure that we're aligned with those unique aspects of ourselves that we want people to see. I think this is so important, so I'm gonna stick on this for one more slide. Brands build trust, and positioning is what you do to the product. It is what is not what you do to the product, excuse me. It's what you do to the mind of the prospect, and this is what we were just talking about. And I want you to take a look at this image and think about what you see in this image. Most people see at least 2 faces, but there are 3 faces in it. There's a young woman, there's an older woman, and there's a gentleman with a mustache. And the reason I love this image is because it represents all of us in the sense that we all have different sides to us. We all have different aspects, and they're all genuine. And we get to choose whether we're making a career switch, or whether we're looking to get a promotion, or we want to differentiate ourselves from other people who do product management or data analytics or whatever our current role is. We get to choose what we put forth. And a lot of people tell me, oh, Dawn, that feels like it's not genuine to be something I'm not. And I would say that's not what brand is at all. Brand is not about being something you're not. It's about choosing what aspect of yourself you want to highlight. And if you're in a job switch, for example, you want to know your audience, what their pain points are, and what aspects of yourself you want to put forth to solve those problems. Because let's face it, we all have a short attention span. If you're not putting forth something that that person is interested in, you're going to lose their attention. And when we talk about it in relationship to a product, it's sometimes much more simple to understand. So if you think about a vehicle, for example, a vehicle has many different features to it. And if I'm selling a car to a young family, probably what I'm going to highlight about that vehicle are the 8 airbags, the run-flat tires, the child locking seats, and all the aspects that are going to be most important to them. Now, that car may also have a killer sound system, be able to go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, and a lot, leather seats and all these other things, and that might be all part of the same vehicle. And I might use those aspects to sell it to a different customer who's more interested in those things. But the fact is, it's all part of the same vehicle. And I think we need to think about ourselves that way. We are complex. Which part of us do we want to put forward when we're talking to our audience? And if you think about your clients, or you think about your potential hiring manager or your network, I think this is really important and something that we have a lot of control over. So as you move forward in 2019, I would encourage you, think about your unique selling points. What are they? What differentiates you from other people who do your work? Think about your goals, whether you want a promotion or a job switch, or maybe you want to relocate and be an expat, or whatever your goals are, think about those, and how can you start positioning yourself to that audience in a way that they see those qualities that are going to solve those problems. So I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of the job search. You know, there's so many aspects to it, and I think brand is an important one to highlight because, you know, when we think about hiring managers and we think about making a switch and we think about meeting their needs, one of the things that is so important is that if they're concerned we're not the traditional candidate, they're going to be concerned that we're not going to be able to do the job. And hiring managers experience loss aversion in the same way that job seekers experience loss aversion. I mean, they're worried that they're going to put their reputation on the line if they hire the wrong person, or you're going to leave, or they're not going to get the work done, they're going to have to hold your hand. So they're thinking about these things too when they're hiring you as a switcher, which is why I think branding yourself to solving their problems is such a critical aspect of the job search. Also, you know, one of the things that people do when they approach the job search is they think about it in terms of selection. But in truth, the job search is actually, from the hiring side, about elimination, not selection. And I think when you think about it that way, it changes your whole strategy. As a hiring manager, and many of you on the webinar have likely hired, you have one position. So you have 250 applicants you have to eliminate. And one of the easy things they do is they get rid of the low-hanging fruit, which is why applicant tracking systems often are our worst nightmare as a switcher, because it will knock you out of the running. So what happens is that as they're looking to eliminate, they're looking at things like, oh, we have too many job hopping, you have too many gaps, you have too many years at this company, and they're looking for this low-hanging fruit. And certainly as a switcher, it's really easy for them to eliminate you, which is why the brand aspect is so important. I always say match first, stand out second. If you put forth those aspects of your brand that they want to see, that solves their problems, and then, you know, later you can talk about other things, then they're going to be so much more willing to hire you. And I want to, if you're a switcher, and if you're thinking about this idea of elimination versus selection, I want to kind of do a quick exercise. No matter where you are, whatever room you're in or office, take 10 seconds to look at everything red in the room, everything red around you. Posters, signs, books, and remember it. Now close your eyes and recall as many green objects as you can. That should be tough to do, and that's tough to do, but the reason I love that exercise is because that's what hiring managers are looking at when they are hiring. And if you are a switcher, they're looking for something very specific, something very traditional, and if you've not taken the time to rebrand yourself in that way, they're going to miss you. So it's really critical to build your brand in that aspect. Another really critical part of this process is your network. So creating ambassadors. Because what we know is that hiring managers, like any other humans, are biased. They are biased towards what they want to see. They think traditional background makes sense, so they're looking for that traditional background. But the beauty of an ambassador is, or your network, is that they can get you past that bias. They can get you past that applicant tracking system. They can get you in front of the decision makers. And if you can make it that far, especially with a glowing endorsement, now the job is yours to lose. So I think networking cannot be understated. And the difference between creating an ambassador and networking is that an ambassador knows your brand, your ambassador knows your goal, and an ambassador is very clear on your plan A and helps put you in front of those decision makers or connect you to those decision makers who can make it happen. So it's not just somebody in a Rolodex, it's not just somebody that you've met in passing, but it's somebody who's willing to go to bat for you. And I think it's important to think about the people in your life. And one of the things I always ask is, do the people who care about you, who you interact regularly with right now, Maybe it's your yoga buddies, your former classmates, your book club, the people you interact with at the dog park, your hairdresser, your siblings, your the other parents of the kids you watch on the soccer sidelines. Do they know what you do, what your expertise is, what you want to do? Because if they don't, we're all missing out on a huge opportunity, because these ambassadors, they already like us. They already know us. They already believe in us. They think we're capable. They'd be happy to make introductions. But if they have no idea what our brand is, or maybe they've known us for a long time and they still see us in our former brand when we want to do something new, and 2019 is the year of the switch, and we haven't told them what we want that new brand to be and what we want that new goal to be, then they can't help us. And I think that's one of the easiest ways to network, is to start with the people you know and ask them, do they actually know what you do? Do you actually know what they do? Chances are they know the surface details, like maybe you work at Wharton, or you do something with getting people a job, but they really don't understand what it is. A lot of people know I work at Wharton. Their first thought is that I teach finance. That is so not true. Or a lot of people know I'm a career coach, but they think that's recruiting and placement. Again, not true. So people only know the surface details about you. They can't be ambassadors because they can't help you. So I think one of the easiest things you can do in 2019 for your career is make sure those people who have connections everywhere know your career goals and know your expertise. So I want to do a quick exercise because I believe networking is so important that it's something we should be working on all the time, not just when we're in a job search. And so if you have a piece of paper, this will be helpful. So I want to talk about networking advantage. A lot of times when I talk to students, they say I have no idea where to start networking or who to talk to or what to do. And Herminia Ibarra, who's a faculty member at the London Business School, and she's very famous for her book, Working Identity, offers this model to make sure that your network is robust. And she talks about your networking advantage being made up of different people in your network and different circles in your network. So the first one being the breadth. And this is strong relationships with diverse contexts. So this could be peers, this could be colleagues, this could be people junior to you, people inside your company, people outside your company, diversity of age, location, culture. So thinking about your network, what is the breadth of your network? If you're in an organization, do most of the people you know work in that organization, or do you take time to branch out and meet people outside of that? Is everybody in your network around the same age, or do they live in the same geography? So these are some opportunities to expand your network. The second one is about connectivity. And this is the capacity to kind of link across networks. So this is sort of the famous 6 degrees of separation, which is now actually less than 4. And so if you think about it, one of the best ways to build this, I tell my students, is you want to link in with people in your network, everybody you know, whether it's your dentist, your hairdresser, your accountant, because they all have circles of people, which would be your second-level contacts, that they can introduce you to. And they have a completely different breadth of network. And so always link in with people that you speak with or that you meet or that you interact with on LinkedIn. And make sure you send a personal message, because LinkedIn will save that, and you'll remember where you met that person, which if you have a big network sometimes gets hard to do. But this way, your second-level contacts expand, and when your second-level contacts expand, then you have infinite opportunities. And the last one is dynamism. And this is thinking about your future, and this goes back to planning. Do you have networks? Do you have contacts who can help you get to where you see yourself in the future, so that can help you get to your future goals? So I want to do a quick experiment. And I'm going to show you a visual. And what I want you to think about is, imagine you get a phone call at 5 o'clock today telling you you've lost your job. I know this isn't a happy example, but it's not happening. Just imagine you've lost your job. I want you to think of 8 people who you would call immediately. And I want you to write them in a list similar to what's on the screen. Who are the 8 people you would call immediately for help? And just take a moment to do that. Then I want you to write those 8 people across the top, and similar to the visual, put an X in the box where those contacts overlap. So the premise behind this exercise that Harmonia Ibarra does is that, one, hopefully you have 8 contacts that you would be able to call tomorrow, but the more X's you have in the boxes, the more that network overlaps, which means that those individuals probably play in the same circles. And the goal is to build a network that you feel you could call if you needed a job that doesn't overlap. And so I think this is always a great exercise to do. I do it once a year to ensure that you are making efforts to build your networking advantage, the breadth, the connectivity, the dynamism. Sometimes I do this with students and they can't even list 8 people, and that becomes a different kind of problem. But these are things you can be thinking about as you're planning your career that will help you continue to take steps forward in the areas where you may have gaps. The final thing I want to talk about is cultivating your career story. So we talked about that in the beginning. And what we know are there are many ways to get from point A to point B. And a lot of you have skills that are transferable to so many places. But think about it for a minute. How do you introduce yourself when you meet someone new? After your name, chances are you probably talk about your title and company. So I'm Dawn Graham. I work at Wharton, in the executive MBA. So doing this really limits you because, one, we're assuming that people understand what that means, but 2, we're giving our power away because they get to interpret that any way they want. And particularly if you're making a career switch or you're looking to build your ambassadors, or you're trying to shape your brand, this gives away so much of your power. And if there's nothing else, one of the things I want you to walk away with is how to introduce yourself in a way that talks about your expertise or your unique aspects of how you do your job. A lot of times if you're looking to make a switch, the jargon and acronyms that we get so immersed in and become part of our identity in our current roles prevent us from making that switch. Sometimes it prevents us from seeing opportunities, but it certainly prevents our network and hiring managers from seeing us in different ways. This is common in the military. We have so many qualified military members who are looking to get civilian jobs, and unfortunately they're using words like platoon and other things that employers don't know what to do with. And so one of the things we need to do is give people the language to understand the expertise we bring. We have to do the work for them. It is up to us to do that because otherwise, with our short attention spans, people are on to the next candidate. So one of the things that I would encourage you for 2019 is to think about how you introduce yourself and how you might do it differently. So I want to give an example. This is the checklist I use for the career story. And if you're in a job switch, these are some of the things you want to think about, that you've demonstrated commitment to the target, that it's logical to your audience. So a lot of people don't understand what you do, and they're too afraid to ask. So you may have this fancy title, and people may walk away saying, I have no idea what that is. So I think you have to remember that sometimes this jargon gets in the way of the connections. I think you have to be genuine. Again, it goes back to your brand. There's many aspects of your brand. Which one do you want to put forward? And then communicate your value. A lot of people don't communicate the value. They communicate titles or labels, but not the value they bring. And then depending on your audience, incorporating what makes you unique in your role. So I want to give you an example of a career switcher. And you don't need to be switching careers. You can simply be introducing yourself to somebody at a networking event or, in another aspect, or using this as a tell me about yourself in an interview. But I think this is a phenomenal example of a woman who was a double switcher, and she was the person I mentioned earlier in the talk. She was a lawyer, corporate lawyer, who wanted to go into human resources in a tech startup. And this is how she introduced herself. I'll give you a moment to read it. What I love about this example is that if you didn't know she was a lawyer, chances are you wouldn't have got that from this. All of this is true. All of these things were absolutely true, and it demonstrates her commitment to the target. It's logical to her audience. She's identified what their pain points are, and she's communicated her value through this. And this is how she started introducing herself, and this is how she started talking to her audience to create ambassadors. And I think we all need to do this, where you're looking to switch careers or you're just looking to build a brand that's different or broader or more focused on what makes you unique. If we all come up with a career story that we can introduce ourselves to our audience in a way that they understand what we do and they understand the value, and that they can share with others to create ambassadors, we're creating a network of opportunities for ourselves that we may not even be able to see. And so as we wrap up, I want to come back to these three circles that we talked about in the beginning. What am I learning that's relevant? Who am I meeting? How am I showing up? I think as you think about career planning for 2019, whether you're looking to make a career change or not, these things are going to be critical for all of us. As the market continues to change, our roles are going to continue to change. The opportunities out there are going to continue to change. And if we're doing these things daily, just through the interactions and the opportunities we see every day, we're going to have so many more opportunities. So as you think about 2019, hopefully we're all going to spend more than an hour and a half planning our career, because the fact is there's so many opportunities just waiting to be found, and we don't have to wait to be chosen. We can create them every day through the actions we're taking. So I'm going to pause there for questions. I'm going to put my contact information up. Of course, I'm certainly very open to people linking in with me, and I'm going to give the stage back to Erin.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dawn. Well, we do have a few questions that have come through, and so I'll go ask you some of those. Well, the first one came in fairly early on, but she asked, how do you consciously brand or rebrand yourself successfully?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think one of the things that we talked about that I think is important to highlight is a lot of the jargon and acronyms that we use in our everyday jobs become so commonplace to us that they get in the way. If you think about how we introduce ourselves or how we talk about our roles, we often incorporate these things into those conversations, which makes people, like if you think about the lawyer, if she's talking about briefs and courtrooms and things like that, I mean, it gives people a visual that is very different from where she wants to go. So I think it does take some time and effort to sit down and look at your resume or your LinkedIn or how you talk about yourself and in a way neutralize those words to create a situation where, for example, in the military, instead of talking about your platoon, talk about your team, and to make it easy for your audience to see you in a new way.
Okay, great. Here's another one again. This kind of came on earlier, but what are your views on switching on a high versus switching on a low? This person says she's worried about switching when the job's not going well. Will that give a new employer a bad impression that perhaps you were driven out as opposed to leaving on a high note?
Yeah, so I think, one of the slides I put not TMI, so not too much information. I think we get to create our career story, and I think sometimes, we miss that fine line between what do we need to share and what do they need to know. The fact is an employer needs to know that you can come in and do the job without your handheld and get the results. Every employer or job interviewer is going to ask you why you're leaving, 100%. So you have to be ready for that answer. But you get to choose what you say, and I absolutely think it should be genuine. But chances are that in this case, maybe you've hit a ceiling, you can't move any further, or maybe you're looking for opportunities or maybe you're looking to change industries. Always think about the positive. There's always the positive and negative about why you're leaving, always. So instead of focusing on the negative, which are there, focus on the positive. I'm looking to grow this. I'm looking to broaden this. It's time for me to make this kind of move. And that's what I think. So it doesn't matter if you're leaving on a high or low. What matters is how you brand your story to others.
Okay. Another question on branding. How do you manage brand in terms of what you think your brand is versus how it's perceived?
Yeah, so I think step one is figuring out how you are perceived. And a lot of people have assumptions about that, but when they do that email to 10 people, sometimes people are really surprised. So I think that's step one. You've kind of got to get that baseline, is understand how you are perceived. And when you find things in there that you want to change, what's going to change them are your actions. People are always going to come back to your actions. So I'm just giving a very easy example. If you're always showing up late, and that comes back, you need to show up earlier. I mean, there are always things you can do. Now, if you're talking about your professional brand in terms of your actual function, a lot of times that's going to be something you can change when you look at your LinkedIn or your resume and you see the jargon and kind of neutralizing that, or gaining experiences, whether it's through volunteering or self-created internships or taking on new projects at work, and putting those on your resume or LinkedIn. I think one of the hardest things as a switcher that I've asked my students to do is to remove accomplishments from their LinkedIn or their resume that they're very proud of, but that don't align with where they want to go. That is so painful, to be very proud of something, but to have to remove it. One of my colleagues calls it impressive but not relevant. And a lot of us, if we're looking to make a switch, have very impressive things. So, for example, I had a student who had a PhD in chemistry. She was in pharma, healthcare, and she wanted to switch to the business side, and she kept leading with that PhD. And, of course, the business side didn't want to see that. They wanted to see that she had data analytics skills and, strategy and finance and all these other things. And when she started leading with those things, even though they were a smaller part of her identity, the doors started opening. And then when she got to the final round, her PhD was actually a huge differentiator and helped her win that final role. But it's always about match first, stand out second. If you don't match first, you're never going to get the opportunity to stand out second.
Okay, great. Let's see here. We've got another one on networking. Once you make a connection, how do you steer it to the subject of possibly helping with a job? And then kind of the second part is then how do you maintain a connection?
Yep. So here's the thing. I would always say start with the people you know, because the people you know will introduce you to contacts, and I always think that's easier than just reaching out to a stranger. And I'm not saying don't reach out to a stranger, but I think if you can find a mutual contact, that kind of softens the intro a little bit. The fact is we know people are reaching out to us for something. I mean, it's kind of unspoken, but we recognize that this is what people are doing. They're either trying to grow their career or find out a piece of information, or so I think that you don't need to say that, but I also think people who you reach out to don't have jobs. So the important thing is to ask them for something they can actually help you with. And oftentimes that's information, that's maybe a connection to somebody else, or you know, that's a piece of data or next step that will help you get to where you want to be. So I think always looking at your contact as somebody who's going to not give you a job, but the next step is critical. And I think going into a networking meeting with 2 clear questions that your contact's uniquely qualified to answer and is building the relationship is so much more important than coming out of there with a job, because you always have to go into a first meeting assuming there's going to be a second meeting. And to the second point of that question, in terms of staying in touch, you know, we've all seen these kind of, you know, send them an article. Now, I'm going to say don't send me an article, because if you send me an article, then I have to read it, and that, you know, no one's got the time to do that. But what I would say is, when you meet somebody, if you have good rapport, one of the easiest things you could say is, you know, this is really helpful. I'm going to follow up with your advice. Can I loop back with you after, you know, and let you know how it goes? So if they told you to go to a conference, or maybe they introduced you to somebody they know, loop back with them and say, you know, meeting Joe is really great. He gave me all this information. Thank you. You know, I'll keep you posted on how things progress, and then check in with them every few months. If you're on social media, this makes it really easy. You can like their work. You can give them an endorsement. You can share their accomplishments. Social media has made it so much easier to stay in touch with large amounts of people, because you can share content that's helpful to groups, and they can see you pop up in their email. You know, write a review if they have material out there. Read their material. Sign up for their blog. There's so many ways to keep in touch through technology these days that we really don't have any more excuses not to.
So this person asks, when you make a double switch, how do you know when it's time to sacrifice in terms of demotion or taking a pay cut?
Yeah, so I think that's a very personal answer. Everybody's got different, what I call non-negotiables. So, you know, maybe you're divorced and you have joint custody of a child, and you can't move, you can't relocate. And that's your non-negotiable. Some people need health care, and that's a non-negotiable. So you have to understand what your non-negotiables are. And I think we tend to lump in more non-negotiables than actually exist. So what I mean by that is, sure, there's ideal things we want, but are they truly non-negotiable? Sure, we don't want to take a pay cut, but could we is a very different question. So know your non-negotiables and discern what are your ideals, and then think about how will this work. The fact is, you may have to take a step back in salary, but it may be temporary. So could you take a step back in salary for 2 to 3 years and then get back up to where you want to be if that job is where your heart is? The other thing you can do is what I call a stepping stone career. So if you find that either financially or just, you know, where you are in life, you can't make that switch in one fell swoop, which a lot of people can't, think about making a stepping stone switch. So maybe you're in a large organization and you've done well and you've built a good reputation, and they're willing to give you a shot in the marketing department even though you work in HR, because they want to retain you. And then you could build up those marketing skills, and then after 2 years switch to the industry you want to be in. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I think the important part of planning and why so much planning goes into it is that it has to work for you.
Okay, so here's another one, and this might be one of our last couple of questions, but, you know, what are good ways, and this person is talking about further understanding and gathering information about their own brand, and so they're asking, you know, what are good ways to ask what they, the employer, how do they see me, how do others see me, and what they, you know, what they would consider your strengths to be?
Yeah, I think, you know, one way to do that, which is kind of built in, is through performance reviews. A lot of companies have somewhat standard performance reviews that don't get to this type of information, but I think you can ask these questions in the performance reviews, even if it's not covering that. So I think, you know, that's one way. Take advantage of what's already in the system to get that type of feedback. Some organizations will allow you to do a 360, you know, as part of your development. And so sometimes I think we need to ask to get some of this feedback, because we know people are very uncomfortable with giving feedback, especially if it's developmental. And so we have to pursue that somewhat assertively in order to get it.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Dawn, for your insights today. Just to let everyone know, recordings of this and all our webinars can be found at our website, fortefoundation.org. But again, thank all of you for attending today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and thank you for completing the evaluation in advance. We look forward to having you join us again next month. Bye, everyone.